Welcome to the WalterFootball.com podcast. This is episode 365. I guess we made it a year if we were doing a podcast every day, but we're not. So I don't know why I said that. Joined once again by Jacob Kamiker. We're going to be discussing the NFL trades that happened, all the quarterback moves this offseason, which it's kind of been nuts how many trades there have been. So I can't wait to discuss it with Jacob. Jacob, how have you been?
I've been pretty good. Glad to be back on after a couple weeks off. Excited to talk about what's been a crazy NFL offseason. It's funny. I think last time we were on the show, we did quarterback landing spots, and both of us were kind of like, yeah, it's looking like everything might stay status quo. I think I threw in a curveball of Russell Wilson to the Broncos just to see what would happen, and lo and behold, that ended up happening. So I mean, it's been a fun offseason so far, and excited to break down all the new starting quarterbacks and recent trades.
Yeah, it's been a while. It feels like that Russell Wilson trade happened a year ago with all the moves that have occurred since then. I think we discussed it with Kenny 2 weeks ago. We were off last week. I could barely talk, so we had to postpone it. Plus, there's so much free agency going on. I'm excited to talk about everything that's occurred since. So once again, please hit like, subscribe, comment below, share this video. Visit the link in the description for the merch store. You can get a cool Walter Football t-shirt like you can see I'm wearing here if you're watching on YouTube. It is very fancy, and you'll definitely stand out at parties if you go. So I definitely recommend it to anyone with a social life. All right, so we're going to discuss the quarterbacks first, and then transition to receivers and then other positions. So the quarterbacks who have moved, I think primarily first we have to get the Deshaun Watson, because that was the biggest trade. Is kind of a blockbuster deal that kind of happened out of nowhere, because we thought that Deshaun Watson was either going to go to Atlanta or New Orleans, and then suddenly he waived his no trade clause and went to Cleveland. So Cleveland acquired Deshaun Watson for 3 first-round picks, a third-round pick, and 2 fourth-round picks. Cleveland got a 5th-round pick in return as well. So what do you think about this trade? It's kind of crazy, with everything going on. Watson could still be suspended, so that's factored in. So what do you think about this move for both teams?
Yeah, I think the Texans, I think, did a good job of getting value for Deshaun Watson. Like when he was first, he didn't play at all last year, and when all the allegations came out about him, I was like, there's no way they're going to be able to trade him for what they're asking for. And they managed to get, I think, 5 or 6 draft picks and 3 first-rounders. So that's a haul, even for a great young quarterback like Watson. I know they don't have a legitimate replacement for him yet. Davis Mills looked okay last year. They seem to be willing to give him a shot this year. If he doesn't pan out, then they can target a quarterback in 2023 to replace him. So I thought they did a good job. The Browns, this is a major risk, just because we don't know how long Deshaun Watson's going to be suspended. They gave him a guaranteed contract worth $230 million, blew the previous record for guaranteed money out of the water. Aaron Rodgers had set that this offseason with $150.7 million over 3 years. Josh Allen had one for $150 million. Patrick Mahomes had, I think, $141.5 million guaranteed on his deal. Deshaun Watson's deal is fully guaranteed. That is a big risk, because we just don't know if he gets into trouble off the field again. He could be suspended long term, and I think he's going to be suspended this year, no matter what, because he didn't play last year, but he was never officially suspended by the NFL. They're not going to just say, "Hey, he didn't play last year. That was an effective suspension," because it just wouldn't look good for them. So they're going to probably hit him with a 6-game suspension with the personal conduct policy. So that's going to hurt the Browns early in the season. We'll see what happens for them when he gets back to the field. I imagine he'll still play well. But the acquisition of him, giving up so much for him and paying him so much, it's a big risk. I don't hate it for the Browns. If we're talking specifically about the player, there's no doubting that Deshaun Watson is talented. But from an organizational standpoint, just because of everything that's surrounding him, the allegations, and the fact that they're going to have to sell so low on Baker Mayfield, this is a big risk. If they were getting like commensurate value for Baker Mayfield, which it doesn't sound like they're going to, and we'll talk more about that later, I'd feel maybe a little differently about this. But there's just so much risk with this. I'm interested to see how it pans out. A lot of people are touting the Browns as the favorites in the AFC North right now. I think they're favored to win even by Vegas odds, which I'm I'm surprised by. I think the Bengals are the team to beat, but we'll see how this pans out long term. I mean, they're getting a talented player, but they're giving up a lot.
Yeah, they are giving up a lot. And I feel like they had a franchise quarterback in Baker Mayfield already. Now Mayfield had a bad year in 2021, but I think you can attribute that to his shoulder injuries. He got hurt twice with that shoulder, first in week 2, and then against the Chargers later in the season. But I wonder, like, I wonder if the Browns are a little bit concerned about that. It kind of reminds me of Chad Pennington. When Pennington came into the NFL, he was super accurate. He led the Jets to the divisional round of the playoffs in 2002. He looked like he was going to be a franchise quarterback, and then his shoulder kept getting injured, and eventually he just lost his arm strength. Now, Baker Mayfield may not even be close to that. Maybe it's not chronic or anything, but getting your shoulder hurt twice in the same year, I think there is some sort of concern for that. I think you have to be a little bit worried. Also, they kind of fractured the relationship with Baker Mayfield and trying to go after Watson in the first place. After it seemed like they weren't going to get Watson, and then they're like, "Oh, Baker Mayfield's our quarterback," and then Mayfield's like, "No, like I want to get traded." So it's kind of a relationship that's kind of ruined already. And now maybe they could have repaired it. I feel like they could have. Maybe they just offered Mayfield a lot of money to kind of. To kind of make things okay between the two parties. But at the same time, if you're going to give a guy who has 2 shoulder injuries in the single season a lot of money, maybe that's a big risk. So I don't blame the Browns for doing this. I know it's a lot of draft picks, but Watson's a top 5 quarterback. I feel like if he's healthy and on the field focused, look what he did with Houston. I mean, he kept leading them to the playoffs despite them not having any offensive line to protect them. And now he's going to have a good offensive line in Cleveland. He's going to have a great running game by his side. They have Amari Cooper. You assume they're going to draft the receiver at 44. I think that's their pick in the second round. Or maybe they'll sign another receiver. So he has a great supporting cast around him. Like you said, he's probably going to be suspended. I personally wouldn't suspend him because he didn't play at all last year. It feels like, you're going to suspend him for 18 games instead of, or 17 games plus 6, 23 games. Seems like a lot. I know he wasn't technically suspended last year, but he didn't play. And the way his contract works out, he's not going to lose a lot of money if he doesn't play this year. So, I really don't, I don't know. I feel like he's already paid his price, So I think this is a fine trade for the Browns. It gave up a lot. The contract is what bothers me. You touched on how fully guaranteed it is. Like, it's insane how much money he's getting. I don't know why the Browns would do this. Why they'd offer him so much money fully guaranteed. What if he gets injured in his first or second year? Now you're stuck with a terrible contract. It's going to ruin your team for the next decade or so. So I think this trade's fine for the Browns. I hate the contract. And for Houston, like for a quarterback who's gotten into trouble off the field to get 3 first-round picks plus 3 picks in the middle rounds, I think that's a great deal for Houston.
Yeah, it to me feels like Houston won if you look at the whole, like, the grand picture, I think Houston wins the move because they weren't going to be ready to compete anytime soon, even if Watson was like, yeah, I'm going to return to you guys. Like, they still have a lot of work to do. Now they can accelerate the rebuild. Yeah, the contract's the worst part of this for the Browns because, again, like you said, if he gets hurt or if he gets in more trouble, they're on the hook to pay him no matter what. And that's just a big, big problem because we don't know what type of suspension action the NFL will take this year, let alone if anything in the future should happen. So, Deshaun Watson in Cleveland is going to be something to watch, and how Baker Mayfield bounces back wherever he lands next. Because if he can stay healthy, I agree with you. I think he can be a very good quarterback. A lot of people are really down on him after last year, but he was hurt. He was really hurt, and he could have easily just sat out, and no one would think, oh, Baker's declining. So I feel bad for him in this situation. A couple quarterbacks got put into awkward scenarios this offseason.
That's true. Let's talk about Mayfield now, right? So you kind of assume that Seattle and Carolina are the 2 logical spots. There was a report today that Carolina is not going to pursue him. So it's really only Seattle. And you kind of figure that the Browns don't really have much leverage here. Like, they have to move Mayfield and they only have 1 spot. So it seems like they're not going to get much for him, right?
Yeah, it doesn't sound like it. I've read reports that some teams want Cleveland to attach a draft pick to Mayfield to take him on. I really do not think that's going to happen, given the market we've seen for quarterbacks this offseason. I mean, maybe the Seahawks can leverage them and just say, hey, like, we'll give you this. This is a 5th round pick. That's all you're getting. You have to get rid of him for cap space reasons. No one else is going to pay for him. It's either us or Carolina, and Carolina doesn't want him. I don't exactly understand why Carolina doesn't want him. I mean, he'd be an upgrade over Sam Darnold. I understand it's a 1 year, $18.8 million contract, and you're stuck if he doesn't pan out or he gets hurt again, then you're kind of stuck in neutral at quarterback again. That would hurt Matt Rule, but it's not like they're going to get a consistent alternative to him at this point. So, yeah, I think it's looking like Baker would probably end up in Seattle. I would have thought Atlanta would make sense for Mayfield as well, but they signed Marcus Mariota, and I don't think that they're going to want 2 veteran quarterbacks on their roster. I think they're more apt to get Mariota and then draft and develop a guy, or get Mariota, ride him out, and if they don't do well this year, get a guy like CJ Stroud or Bryce Young in next year's class. But yeah, I think Seattle's probably the landing spot for Baker Mayfield, unless the Panthers have a change of heart or another team suddenly emerges in the Mayfield sweepstakes. But I don't see that happening right now.
Yeah, it seems like Seattle is the most logical spot. I agree. I don't understand why Carolina. Maybe they really love Kenny Pickett or something. Maybe that's the thing. Otherwise, I can't really I don't understand why they wouldn't go after Mayfield. You can't go into the season with Sam Darnold as your starting quarterback. He's just so terrible. Like, you just can't do it. And Atlanta, it's interesting. They signed Marcus Mariota. It looked like a 2-year, $12 million contract. It was, or 2 years, 18, I think. And it was really 1 year and $6.75 million, as it turns out. And real quick on Mariota, I like the deal because he's still young. I think he's 28. He still has some upside. And if he's bad, you're obviously going to be bad. You're going to have a terrible record in 2022. And so you can get one of those great quarterbacks in the 2023 NFL draft class. But if Mariota is good, suddenly you have like a fairly young quarterback, and you could build around them. So I like it. I like the upside of Mariota. I wonder if he really learned a lot under Greg Olson, who is a quarterback whisperer. And so maybe he can take that into Atlanta. So I really like the deal for the Falcons.
Yeah, I'm a fan of it too. Mariota, the problem with him was never talent. He was an accurate quarterback. Early in his career, he didn't really throw interceptions. I think his second year, he had 26 touchdowns and 7 interceptions passing, and he obviously added value running on the ground then. But then he kind of got hurt. He dealt with that elbow injury. He wasn't as accurate. He threw more turnovers, couldn't get the ball downfield consistently. But I'm thinking that the injuries at this point should have healed, because he was a backup most of the time with the Raiders there. But he did have a hamstring injury, but that was just from a long run that he just pulled up lame on. So I'm not too worried about that for him. And, they're getting him really cheap. Like you said, if he doesn't work out, they can move on from him. If he does work out, you get him for 1 year at $12 million. You try to extend him, say, hey, we're going to give you a contract worth $20 million a year, but the guarantees are low. I think he would agree to that if he has a good year this year. So yeah, I think that was a really good signing by Atlanta. He has familiarity with Arthur Smith. So I think that's a bonus. And I think that they're well set up so that they can get a top quarterback in 2023 if Mariota doesn't pan out. So I like the approach that they've taken, even if the Matt Ryan trade wasn't the process of it was not good.
Yeah. Speaking of Matt Ryan, the Colts got him for a 3rd round pick. That's it this year. So what are your thoughts on that deal for both teams?
Yeah, so I like it a lot for the Colts. I graded this trade over at sportingnews.com. I gave the Colts a B for the move. My logic and reasoning: Matt Ryan, definitely the best quarterback they've had since Andrew Luck. 3rd round pick is not much to pay for him. He fits Frank Reich's scheme very well. You could convince me to give them a higher grade. The only thing that I have a concern with is they can't be thinking in their heads, we got Matt Ryan, we're done, we're going to contend for a Super Bowl. They have a few other holes to plug at left tackle, at receiver, at cornerback. They need to add to their pass rush. So they have a few things to fill in the next month to really become a contender in what's looking like a loaded AFC. But I really like the move for them. I mean, he's going to be similar to their acquisition of Phillip Rivers, but Matt Ryan has more left in the tank than Rivers did when he went to the Colts. And more than anything else, with the arm talent, Matt Ryan still has arm strength. Phillip Rivers, as we saw, declined slowly his last year in the NFL. So I love it for the Colts. I think it's going to be rock solid, if not take them into a contending position in the AFC South. I gave the Falcons an F, and my logic and reasoning is this. They basically screwed up their quarterback position beyond repair by trying to get Deshaun Watson and not consulting with Ryan. They kind of put themselves in quarterback limbo, sort of what the Browns did, except the Falcons didn't end up getting Watson. So they had to go back to Matt Ryan and be like, hey, Matt, we still really like you and want to keep you. And Matt Ryan was like, no, I'm going to move on at this point. Like, I don't want to be here. I want to go try to win. And, the organization did right by him and got rid of him. My problem with it is they should have made this decision earlier in the offseason, because if they had just said, hey, Matt, we're going to try to move on from you. We want you to go to a contender. You've given us 14 good years. We're not a contender right now. They could have gotten more for him, because they could have created a bidding war with some teams. But as it stood, by the time they decided to trade Matt Ryan, the only team that could really afford him, that made sense for him, was the Colts, because, the Seahawks probably don't want a 36-year-old quarterback. They probably want someone young with upside to compete there. And the Falcons weren't going to trade him to the Panthers in the division, because they spoke well of him, and they don't want to bail Matt Rule and those guys out unless they think that they're terrible coaches over there. So I think the way in which they went about doing this, kind of not consulting Ryan with everything, pushing back his roster bonus, not making the decision before free agency, kind of scrambling to pick up Marcus Mariota, which is a signing I like, and I'm not going to deny that. But I just feel like they should have had a better plan in place. And getting only a third-round pick for Matt Ryan in an offseason where Carson Wentz, who granted is younger, I know, but he hasn't had the same level of success or consistency as Ryan, went for 2 third-round picks and a second-round pick swap. I think that's pretty poor on Atlanta. So I had to fail them for the process. I do think that moving on from Ryan's the right move for them. I think they have to rebuild, but they needed to make the decision in January, not in the first week of free agency.
I think they needed to make the decision last offseason. I mean, there were so many good quarterbacks in the 2021 draft class. Now, Trey Lance is off the board. They reportedly wanted him, but there's still Justin Fields, and Mac Jones had a great rookie year. They could have had one of them. They could have started rebuilding with one of those quarterbacks, but they stubbornly stuck to Matt Ryan, and it was kind of like it was a decision. I remember the reports saying that there was like internal struggle, whether what to do. It just seemed like they were prolonging their rebuild, and like it felt like they needed to start that earlier. And they kept Matt Ryan for a year. They could have traded him for more last offseason, and now they only got a third-round pick. And I think it's, given the situation they were in where they didn't have too many suitors, and also given Matt Ryan's contract, I'm kind of surprised they even got a third-round pick for him. Feels like you were talking about with Baker Mayfield only getting a fifth-round pick. Seems like Atlanta is lucky that they didn't have to settle for just a fifth-rounder. So, I agree. Like, I think you're right on in saying, like, Atlanta could be failed for this. But I gave them a C+ because I'm kind of surprised that they actually got some compensation for Matt Ryan, even though like right now he could play better than the quarterbacks the Colts have had in the past. You're dead on saying he's the best quarterback they've had since Andrew Luck. They've had some veterans, Phillip Rivers. It seems like he's kind of an amalgamation between Phillip Rivers and Carson Wentz, where Phillip Rivers had the good decision making, but his arm strength was sapped. Whereas Carson Wentz had the terrible decision making, still had the arm strength. Matt Ryan still has both right now. Now, granted, he's gonna be 37 in May. He's on the decline a little bit, but I still think they could get 1 or maybe 2 good seasons out of him. And he's not going to throw into triple coverage like Carson Wentz did, and that still tilted from that Tennessee game where he had Jonathan Taylor open for a 20-yard gain in overtime. He threw into triple coverage, intercepted, game over. If they win that game, forget the Jacksonville game at the end. If they win that game, they get into the playoffs. They're going to have a better quarterback, and Matt Ryan has some good stuff around him. He's going to have a great running game, a good offensive line, an offensive line he hasn't seen since much earlier, the earlier days in Atlanta in like 2017 when he went to the Super Bowl. He's going to have some decent receivers. I feel like they need to add one more receiver, but I think. Michael Pittman is a good receiver. T.Y. Hilton could still have something left, but yeah, they need another receiver. And the defense is pretty good. They added an edge rusher this offseason, which they needed to do. So overall, I like the situation the Colts are in. So I gave them an A. I like this deal. Like giving up a 3rd round pick for a good chance to make the playoffs. And, once you get into the playoffs, who knows what could happen. So, Indianapolis definitely won this trade.
Yeah, I can definitely see giving something in the A grade. I'm admittedly being hard on the Colts. I think just because in recent years with their history of just revolving door at quarterback, which hasn't been entirely their fault, but they've had some misfires. So I'm downgrading them a bit, but I can easily see the A grade. I think the one thing you hit on, it makes so much sense. Matt Ryan's supporting cast in Atlanta these last few years has been terrible. And no one really wanted to talk about that when he was acquired. A lot of people I saw being like, what does he have left in the tank? He's not good anymore. And it's like, no, he's still very good. Like, if you look at the numbers, he threw for over 4,000 yards in, I think, 10 consecutive seasons. And he just missed the mark last year. But he was throwing to a rookie, Kyle Pitts, in Russell Gage. Those were his guys. That's all he had after Calvin Ridley left the team in the middle of the season. So, I mean, he had no weapons, no blocking. Cordero Patterson emerged in the running game as the year went along, and was key there for him. But aside from those 3 guys, they really do not have anything besides like tertiary weapons and depth guys there. The Colts at least have a good blocking unit. They need a left tackle unless they want to play Matt Pryor there. And they need someone to go with Michael Pittman. I think they'll draft a receiver. I think look out for Julio Jones. Matt Ryan, maybe he'll say, can we get Julio on a cheap deal and just see if he can stay healthy because they already have chemistry. But yeah, I like the position the Colts have put themselves in. They're going to be in good shape. That they're in the weakest division in the AFC, which is a huge help. Like they could easily win the South. I think the Titans will be worse this year, even though they're well coached. And I think we both bet the Jaguars to win the Super Bowl as long shots. But that really requires a big step up from Trevor Lawrence, which may happen, but we're not sure yet. So I think the Colts made the move at the right time. So I do like what they've done.
Yeah, it also required the Jaguars to make some good signings,
Yeah.
which they had the most cap space in the NFL, and yet they signed Christian Kirk to insane money. I don't understand what they're doing. But yeah, I mean, you're right on the money with Atlanta's supporting cast. This past season was a disaster, especially when Ridley left the team. So people point to 2020, Matt Ryan had Julio Jones and Calvin Ridley at his disposal. But, Julio Jones was banged up during the year. He was not 100%. They had bad blocking. They had no running game. And their defense was terrible. So, like, Matt Ryan was always in a hole, and he had to throw a lot, trying to come back. He was never in a positive game script, or seldom was in a positive game script. So, that's going to change in Indianapolis. They have a much better defense, obviously much better running game. So Matt Ryan's going to be in a better situation going forward. So I like this trade a lot for the Colts. So let's talk about the Colt quarterback who left. The Redskins acquired Carson Wentz, as you said before, for 2 third-round picks, and they swapped second-round picks. So what do you think about the trade for both teams?
Yeah, I think that's an easy win for the Colts. I gave them an A for this trade over at Sporting News. I mean, we were talking at one point, Carson Wentz, is he going to get cut? Is anyone going to trade for him? And I was like, hey, I could see like maybe Seattle will take him on a Brock Osweiler type deal where, they either are letting the Colts swap up around with them or they're swapping up around with the Colts to take on the contract. And the Colts go out and get a pretty good haul for Carson Wentz. I thought they did well to do that. So I think that was a fantastic move for them. They really replenished their stockpile of picks, and they turned one of those picks that they had in the third round into Matt Ryan. So that was huge. As for Washington, I don't like this move. I don't hate it. And here's where I struggle with it. I don't mind the idea of them getting Carson Wentz, given the situation they were in. They swung for Russell Wilson. They couldn't get him. They needed a quarterback. They needed a veteran. They didn't know who was going to be on the market. They weren't in the running for Deshaun Watson. They looked at Carson Wentz and said, hey, this guy has upside. And he does. And he is better than what they've had at quarterback in recent years. I mean, Carson Wentz has a lot of flaws. He turns the ball over. He doesn't make good decisions. But he at least has arm strength and mobility. And perhaps in the right scenario, he could be coached up and he could regain good form as a starting quarterback. I don't have confidence in that after Frank Reich couldn't do it, but it at least remains possible. So there is some upside with the move. So I didn't fail them for this. I gave them a D. I just think that if you look at it, they paid way too much for Carson Wentz. I mean, that contract, you were not going to find a lot of people that would take that on. I mean, maybe the Panthers would have done it. Maybe there was another team desperate for an upgrade that would have done it. But I don't like the move taking that contract on and paying the amount they did in draft capital. The good thing for them is they have an easy out in the contract. So long as they don't restructure his contract, they can cut him next year if he doesn't pan out, and they can go look for a new quarterback in the 2023 draft class, which if Carson Wentz is throwing interceptions at a high rate, they will be picking high. So I think that's a good situation for them. But if he pans out, they have him under contract for 2 more years and no guaranteed money there, I think, or no dead cap, at least if they cut him. So I think that's a good situation for them contract-wise. He has upside, like I said, but I don't know. I don't have faith in him. I don't mind the move. I mind the price they paid.
Is he better than Taylor Heinicke?
I do think he is. I know that was a popular question. I think he just has more arm strength than Heinicke, and Heinicke had a couple of clunkers last year. I think Heinicke's a better decision maker, though. So, I mean, that's definitely a role to play. Heinicke at his worst is not as bad as Wentz at his worst.
Yeah, I mean, Wentz has more upside for sure than Heinicke. So I think that's the biggest difference. Plus, you said the arm strength, but Wentz hasn't played well in 2 years, and since that Jadeveon Clowney concussion, he just hasn't played well. And I wonder if he's just kind of broken, because you don't really know how a player is going to react from concussion because you can't really see it. Like, with a torn ACL, you can see when a guy's running at full speed and not, or like when a quarterback has an injured shoulder, you can kind of see if their arm strength is sapped or not. But with a concussion, you don't know if a guy is 100% mentally, like maybe he's afraid of getting hit again. Like maybe he just hasn't fully recovered from it. I wonder if there's something there, because ever since that concussion, he's been played poorly. And right before that, he was playing great. Like he took an Eagles team with Greg Ward as the #1 receiver to the playoffs. Like that Eagles team was destroyed by injuries, and he dragged them to the playoffs. It's really impressive. And then ever since that concussion, he just hasn't been the same. And I wonder if he's ever going to be the same ever again. Maybe he can be. Maybe he rebounds, but under Frank Reich, everyone assumed that he was going to play well, and he just didn't. And he's just horrible. He's horrible at making decisions. I referenced that triple coverage interception. It seems like he did that all the time, and he didn't need to. He had a great running game behind him, a good defense, solid offensive line. Like he didn't really need to do all that. He just it's kind of like YOLOing throws. Like it was just so bad. Again, maybe he recovers from this, but I don't know. I mean, if he didn't under Frank Reich, I have major questions about that. And it seems like the Redskins always pick up the Eagles trash. Like they got McNabb when he was super old. They got Deshaun Jackson when he was not in his prime anymore. Now they're getting Wentz. Like it seems like the Redskins always do this and always backfires. I don't see this working out for them. The fact that they didn't have the Colts pay any of Wentz's contract, I know they have an out, but still, it seems like they should have allowed that to happen. And they gave up compensation. I remember talking to you 3 weeks ago where I said I thought Wentz was going to get cut and sign with the Giants to compete with Daniel Jones to be the starting quarterback. And now the Washington trades for him. It just seems like so ridiculous. I hate this trade for Washington. I gave it an F. And the Colts, to get stuff for Wentz and not have to pay his contract, this is an A+ all the way.
Yeah, I think this is an easy win for the Colts. And I'm admittedly being a little bit easy on Washington because I have a lot of Washington followers on Twitter, and I see how they are process the trade. And, I kind of drank the Kool-Aid a bit on some of it. But yeah, you could easily make the case that it's an F. Now, maybe Ron Rivera is able to, get in Carson Wentz's head and get him to play well. We'll see what ends up happening. But yeah, I don't have a lot of faith in this. I also don't know what other Washington moves or what other moves Washington had at that time, because they weren't in on Watson, and no one knew Baker Mayfield was going to shake loose. No one knew Matt Ryan was going to shake loose. So, I wonder if they had known that was going to happen, would they have pounced on Wentz the way they did? I'd say probably not. They maybe still trade for him, but they wouldn't have paid as much. But, we can do what ifs all day. So won't spend too much time dwelling on that.
That's true. Well, Pat asks, the Redskins should get Mayfield. Is he an upgrade over Wentz? Like, I feel like they can't with Wentz's contract. The one thing, if they didn't have to pay him so much money, like you're going to pay Mayfield and Wentz at the same time, it doesn't seem like they could do that. Now, if they never traded for Wentz, I'd say it's a great spot for Mayfield, but yeah, you just can't do it, right?
Yeah, there's no way that you'd be dedicating $42 million to two quarterbacks, and you don't know if either one of them's going to turn into a good starter. You'd feel good about Mayfield. You'd have at least some hope with Wentz, but yeah, you can't do that. They don't have enough money to do it. They'd have to make too many moves.
Yeah. One more thing. Rob says, "Why does y'all's website suck so much now?" I assume you're referring to the ads. There's an ad-free version of the website that you can check out, maybe. But yeah, the ads are unavoidable, unfortunately, unless you do the ad-free experience. So moving on to the other quarterbacks, Jameis Winston back with the Saints. The Saints tried to get Watson, they didn't, and so they went back to Winston, re-signing him for 2 years, $28 million. So what do you think about this contract?
Yeah, I don't hate it. I mean, Winston looked good last year under Sean Payton before he got hurt, threw 14 touchdowns, just 3 picks. Much better decision making. He's still young. He still has upside. I think this contract is fair for his services. Maybe a little bit too much money in terms of guarantees, because I think 21 million of it was guaranteed. So I probably wouldn't have gone that high with the guarantees. But I'm not fully aware of the contract structure. I like the fit there. I'm kind of surprised that the Saints, after striking out on Watson, didn't call about Mayfield at least, because I would think that he would be a great fit in that offense. I mean, they did so well with Drew Brees when he was there. And when Mayfield was coming out of college, I kind of saw some Drew Brees in his game. I saw a little bit more of a fiery Drew Brees with a little more mobility, maybe a little bit worse ball placement. So I thought, hey, maybe they'll try to get Mayfield, see if he can do something and become their quarterback in the future. But I mean, Winston's a fine option. He was one of the best quarterbacks on the free agent market. I know everyone was drooling over Mitch Trubisky, but Winston was probably the most talented free agent out there with a proven track record. So I think if you can cut down on interceptions, that'll be good. I just don't know what the ceiling of the Saints team is, and they keep like pushing that cap space into future years. Eventually, they're going to have to take a reset year. We've talked about this on the show. At times, this might have been the time to do the reset, kind of. Maybe you could still get Winston, but you could maybe not push all that cap space into the future. So we'll see what he can do for them. But I don't think this elevates them too much. But hey, who knows? I bet on him to win MVP last year at 100-1 odds. So maybe he'll live up to that, and I'll be a year late on it.
Maybe. I mean, he was looking good in that Tampa Bay game the first time, and unfortunately he got that injury. I think the Saints are just prolonging the inevitable. Kind of compared the Saints to that 70s show a few weeks ago where, they kind of kept it going, and it was a great show for a while. And then the final season happened when Eric Foreman left and Kelso left. I equate those to Drew Brees and Sean Payton. They're bringing back Jameis Winston, who's maybe like Donna, but you don't really care about Donna. Like you care about Kelso being funny. Foreman was the main character, and they're both gone. Like at some point you have to say it's over. With Tom, especially with Tom Brady coming back. Before Brady returned, you could at least argue that the Saints could win their division because it's so bad. Even still, like even if they got into the playoffs, which I guess they still could do with a wild card because the NFC is not nearly as good as the AFC. Even if they get into the playoffs, you're like, how far can this team go with Jameis Winston and a team that's not going to be nearly as strong as it was before because Terran Armstead's going to be gone. They lost some other players because of their cap situation. I just don't see the Saints upside here, like you were saying. I don't think it's very high. I think their upside is like 10-7 making the playoffs. Like I think that's it, and then losing the first round. I think that's as far as they can go, really. And I don't see much else. And like the downside is much worse because their cap situation is going to be terrible in the next couple of years. I feel like they just need to blow it up, try to get one of the top quarterbacks in the 2023 class. And right now, like, it just doesn't seem like they're going to be able to do that. Like they still have some good players. They're going to be competitive. But overall, I just don't see it working out for them. So I don't like this move. I don't hate it like you do, or like you. I agree with you. I don't hate it either. But I think it's probably like a C or C minus.
Yeah, I think that's about a fair grade for it. I mean, I like Jameis, and I think, in the right scenario, if he stays healthy, he can be a good starting quarterback. But it's a question of the ceiling. Like, he would have to make the leap that everyone thought he was going to make when he came to the NFL as the number one pick, when it was like, this guy's raw talent is off the charts. He's super accurate. He just can throw the ball anywhere. Like, he'd have to live up to that number one pick hype for the Saints to go anywhere. And I don't think that's going to happen under any circumstances. I think the Saints are putting themselves in a tough situation too, because the Falcons are poised for a quick turnaround. They have $113 million in cap space next year. Like, they're taking a massive dead cap hit with Matt Ryan this offseason, the biggest in NFL history at $40.5 million. But that's going to pay off down the road because they're going to have a lot of money to target a lot of quality players, do what the Bengals did, draft a high-end quarterback, and then build around him and spend money in free agency. So the Saints could quickly slip behind the Falcons if they don't reset their cap. And if they do, then they can kind of give the Falcons a run for their money as they both fight to be the class of the division for whatever Tom Brady hangs them up for real, not what he did this year.
Who knows when that's going to happen? Your dad with the important question. What about Fez? Fez, Jackie, and Hyde. I assume that's Alvin Kamara. Who else is there?
Michael Thomas.
Yeah, Michael Thomas and Ryan Ramczyk. Or who's their best defensive player?
Cameron Jordan.
Cameron Jordan, right? I think it would be Cameron Jordan, Alvin Kamara, and Ryan Ramczyk would be Jackie, Fez, and Hyde. And then I guess the I don't know. Let's just move on for people who haven't seen the show. Steelers signed Mr. Trubisky. We talked about this briefly. 2 years, $14.2 million. I think we would both agree that the quarterback's still in play for them in round one, despite the signing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think they're still going to be in the Malik Willis chase. They may trade up to get him, have him compete with Trubisky. And, I was worried when they signed Trubisky at first. I'm like, oh, man, what did they pay him? Like, because I was seeing stuff on Twitter that people were like, hey, this is like going to be a lot of money, isn't it? Oh, maybe they'll go $20 million a year for him. Like, this isn't a Mike Glennon scenario when the Bears paid him $15 million a year and kind of just outbet themselves for him. And it was just like, why did you do that? This is a solid contract for Trubisky, who has some upside. He's better than what the Steelers had last year because he has more arm strength than Big Ben. We'll see what his decision-making is like after a year on the bench in Buffalo. Has he grown? We'll find out. But I think this signing has upside, and bare minimum, they're getting a high-end backup quarterback. So if they draft Malik Willis and Malik Willis is ready, that's great because Trubisky can stick around as a backup, and then they could trade him in the offseason if they think he's ready for a starting job somewhere else. I think this was a solid move by the Steelers. I have absolutely no complaints about it. They didn't overpay for him. And yeah, they didn't get like a high-end quarterback or someone who could maybe lead them on a deep playoff run unless Trubisky has improved dramatically. But they got someone who can lead them back to the playoffs just so long as he doesn't make too many mistakes, because that roster is stacked. And I think that they're in good position to make a playoff run, even in the stacked AFC. They're not Super Bowl contenders, though, unless they draft Malik Willis and he is incredible as a rookie, which probably won't happen, but who knows?
Yeah, I think you're probably right. Their offensive line still needs help. I still question their run defense. They made some nice additions this offseason. So I think they're going to be in the mix to maybe make the playoffs, but their division's so difficult now. You obviously have the Bengals, who just went to the Super Bowl. The Browns got Deshaun Watson. The Ravens, they're going to be healthier, we assume, and Lamar Jackson's still there. So, like, you would say that they're the worst team in the division, even though they're still a pretty solid team. So it's going to be tough for them unless, like you were saying, either Willis is great or Trubisky lives up to his number 2 overall potential. He was the 2nd overall pick just a few years ago. Like maybe he finally lives up to his potential. Like I don't think that's out of the question. We've seen late bloomers before. And he was coached very, very poorly in Chicago. Like I don't think he ever really got a fair chance with Matt Nagy. So with better coaching, maybe he improves. And right now, I think, given his like he has a higher floor because he can run around and he has a good arm. So I think it's a fine move for the Steelers. He's a nice guy to have while Willis develops. But who knows? Maybe Willis just takes the starting job. Like we've seen that before. We've seen rookie quarterbacks come in as the backups entering the preseason and then emerge as the starters because they're great in the preseason. So this may not even matter. Like Trubisky may not even play for the Steelers. But I think he's a good insurance policy just in case the Steelers don't get Willis, or if Willis takes a while to develop. So I think it's a fine move. And like you said, they didn't pay a lot for Trubisky. So why not make the move? I like it.
Yeah, it's $7.5 million a year. That's like the going rate for a very high end backup or low end starter, and that's what Trubisky can be. And if he's improved from that, then he'll outplay the contract. If not, then whatever rookie they draft, likely Malik Willis, will have a shot to overtake him pretty early.
Yeah. One quarterback we haven't touched on really yet is Jimmy Garoppolo. I don't know what's going to happen with him. So assuming Seattle, and he's not going to be traded to Seattle because it's in the division, you'd assume. If Seattle gets Mayfield, where does Garoppolo go? If like Carolina doesn't want him, like where does he go?
It's so confusing because I had just assumed, I looked at Baker Mayfield and Jimmy Garoppolo. I'm like, all right, well, they're going to go to Seattle and Carolina. Then the rumor comes out that they don't want Baker Mayfield. They don't want Jimmy Garoppolo because they're worried about his shoulder surgery. It seems like that shoulder surgery is kind of scared off any team that would consider him. That's the thing that I've seen so far, because Garoppolo, he's not a great quarterback, but with a strong supporting cast, he can get to the playoffs, and he went to the NFC Championship game and the Super Bowl in 2 of the last 3 years. Now, his teams didn't win either of those games, but at least hey, maybe if he finally has a good game or doesn't melt down in the fourth quarter, they could win a championship. So I'm just surprised that no one's taking a shot on him. The 49ers are claiming that they're getting offers of 2 second-round picks for him. I do not believe that at all, not remotely. I don't know why they're pushing that narrative, but I truly don't know where he goes. One maybe sneaky spot he could land is Houston. But I don't think Houston's going to want to give up much for him because they like Davis Mills. They want to start Davis Mills. So Garoppolo would be the backup there making $27 million this season. So it's not like they're going to give up an asset for him. So I think he might just stick around San Francisco for a while. And then if a team strikes out on young quarterbacks in the draft and they're like, hey, we need an upgrade, maybe they'll go get Jimmy G. San Francisco seems to like him though. So I don't think they're going to give him up for nothing if they can help it. But it's a weird scenario, though. So maybe we have to wait and see until he gets healthy and can pass medical exams. Then he could end up being like a rare post-draft quarterback move.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a scenario kind of like we saw with Sam Bradford in the Eagles, where Howie Roseman just waited because he didn't really have a great situation to trade Bradford, and then Teddy Bridgewater goes down in the preseason and the Vikings trade for Bradford. I think we could see something like that this year, maybe. So if, for example, if Patrick Mahomes goes down in the not that he'd play in the preseason, but let's just say he gets hurt in training camp, or Tua Tagovailoa in Miami. If one of those guys gets hurt, maybe those teams trade for Garoppolo. I think you could say any team in the AFC. I don't know if they trade him within the NFC, but any AFC team I think would make sense if they lose the quarterback. We know how many good quarterbacks there are in the AFC. If one of those guys goes down in training camp for the preseason, I think they're going to be desperate to kind of stay relevant, just because they all see it's like an arms race right now. They all seem to try. They're all trying to win right now, and if they can't because of an injured quarterback, they may trade for Garoppolo. So I think that's what the 49ers are doing. And it pairs with the timeline of seeing if Garoppolo's shoulder surgery is going to pan out, and if he's going to be the same quarterback. So I think the two timelines align, and I think we're going to wait a while to see Garoppolo traded. Who knows? Maybe we're both wrong, and he's going to be traded next week or something. But I think it's more likely than not that he's going to be traded in July or August.
Yeah, I think you're right. The Sam Bradford comparison makes perfect sense to me. I could see a team like Houston, like I mentioned, if Davis Mills were to get hurt, maybe they go, all right, let's just go get Jimmy G so we can have a quality starting quarterback. I could see the Patriots doing it too. They'd be the only other one. Bill Belichick loves Jimmy Garoppolo. Yeah. So, I could see him being like, all right, well, Jimmy's really cheap. Let's extend him and pay him as a high-end backup quarterback behind Mac Jones instead of Brian Hoyer. That would be the only other team that I could see making a move before losing a quarterback. But yeah, I think it's going to be a long wait for Jimmy G at this point.
Yeah, I agree. So let's move on to non-quarterbacks, and I think the most prominent move for a non-quarterback was Davante Adams being traded. The Raiders got Adams seemingly out of nowhere, like it's kind of came out of the blue, especially after Aaron Rodgers resigned. Kind of assumed that that Adams would come back, but the Raiders gave up a first and a second round pick this year for Adams. So, what do you think about this trade for both teams?
Yeah, I thought the Raiders did really well in this trade. They didn't give up multiple first round picks. Not that you do often for a non quarterback, but they gave up 2 draft picks for Davante Adams, who's one of the best receivers in the NFL. I know Davante Adams is 29, and I know they paid him a lot of money, but I think he's still going to be a really great receiver. They needed to do something to keep pace with the other teams in their division, too. The thing they've been missing for a long time was the number 1 receiver. They tried to get Antonio Brown. That didn't work out. Henry Ruggs, that didn't work out. So they had to go and get someone. They found Davante Adams available. He has chemistry with Derek Carr. They played together at Fresno State. So now they're finally playing together in the NFL. So I think they did a great job in this trade, not having to go up too much. Now, the Packers, I was stunned that they traded Davante Adams. And it sounded like Adams was just done with Green Bay because he didn't like how they were negotiating his deal. It sounded like they were nickeling and diming him for, he wanted to be paid like DeAndre Hopkins, 27.5 plus million per year. And the Packers kept saying, well, no, because if you take the average of Hopkins' contract, it's actually closer to 20 million. So if you're going to reset the receiver market, it's going to be at 23 million like Julio Jones. And I don't think Adams took kindly to that after a while. So I think he was just done there and forced his way out. And, the Packers got a decent return. They'll be able to add receivers with that first round pick or second round pick or both, but they are so thin at receiver right now. I mean, Aaron Rodgers is back there, but who's he going to throw to? Is Alan Lazard your number 1 right now? Randall Cobb's still there, but he hasn't been good in years. Amari Rodgers was a 3rd round pick last year, but he barely played on offense. I mean, there is not a lot there. The cupboard's pretty barren. They haven't signed anyone in free agency in terms of pass catching weapons because they don't have that much cap space, and they've been spending it on defense. So, yeah, they're going to have to draft receivers early and often. I'm sure they will. I hope they don't make the same mistake and draft a first-round quarterback again instead of a Chase Claypool or Denzel Mims type. Or T. Higgins. I say Denzel Mims. I know he hasn't panned out yet, but I thought that he was in the mix for that pick. So you could have blamed me if they took him. But yeah, I think the Raiders win this trade because they get the best player and they really bolster their playoff chances for the next few years. And I don't think Adams is going to decline in his early 30s. Maybe by the end of that 5-year deal, he won't be, considered the best receiver in the league anymore. But I don't think there's a scenario where by the end of that contract, we're like, wow, Davante Adams really fell off unless he gets hurt a couple times. So, you can't make long-term decisions based off of, on questionable health for a guy who's never really had too many injury issues. So I like the move for the Raiders. The Packers, this one's a head scratcher, and you have to wonder how Aaron Rodgers is feeling about it.
Yeah, is it possible to hate this trade for both teams? Because I don't love it for either side. I mean, I hate it less for the Raiders. Like I can understand why they pulled the trigger. I mean, the division's so stacked, and as they stood before this trade, they had no chance of competing with any of the teams. Now with Adams, like they could stay relevant, but I don't think Adams is enough. As great as he is, I don't think he's enough to get them over the hump against the Chiefs, the Chargers, and the Broncos. Unless those teams suffer tons of injuries, I just don't see the Raiders finishing above 3rd in the division. They're probably going to be 4th, I think. So Adams is not going to make that much of a difference in terms of their playoff seeding. Now maybe every team in the division makes playoffs. I thought that was possible until the Browns traded for Deshaun Watson. So for now, I don't think it's likely at all. And the Raiders are not going to get the same production out of Adams like they had in Green Bay. Like Adams was posting obscene numbers with Aaron Rodgers. Derek Carr obviously not as nearly as good as Aaron Rodgers. I mean, Derek Carr is a fine quarterback. He's okay. But Adams is just not going to produce like he did in Green Bay. So you're paying a lot of money and a lot of draft capital for a receiver who's not going to be as great as he has been in past years. So that's why I don't like this trade for the Raiders. Plus, the Raiders still have major offensive line issues. They don't have a first or second round pick now, so you kind of have to wonder how they're going to address that. And with Green Bay, they brought Rodgers back, and it's like, okay, we're going to try to win in the next few years, and we're going to be screwed cap-wise after that, but, we're going for it. It's okay. I saw that the plan, and it made sense, but then they traded Adams, so it's like, what are they going to do? What are they going to do now? Like, they're going to rely on a rookie receiver to be their number one wideout? Like, even if they bring back Valdez-Scantling, he's not a number one. He's a number two. So I don't know who they're going to draft. Maybe like George Pickens or Christian Watson, or Jameson Williams would be a nice draft pick for the long haul, but he may not be able to play next year. So I kind of wonder what the Packers are going to do. So it's going to be kind of like what we saw against San Francisco when they go up against a great defense. Like Rodgers is just not going to be able to reduce because he's not going to have the weapons. So I hate this trade for Green Bay, even though they got a first and second round pick back. They're not going to get anything nearly as productive as Adams was for them with that first or second round pick, I should say. I absolutely hate this trade for Green Bay and the Raiders. Not nearly as much. I don't hate it nearly as much, but it's still pretty bad.
Yeah, I can understand why you don't like it for the Raiders. I think it would be different if they hadn't made the playoffs last year. I'm not sure they necessarily make this trade, or I don't know if I'd have as high of an opinion of it because I'd be like, do they really think they can compete in that division? I don't think so, but I think they kind of have to be like, we got to the playoffs for the first time in a while last year. We have to at least try to stay in the arms race. And that's maybe not a good way to do business long term, but Josh McDaniels went there to win. I don't think he wants to get in a scenario where he has to tank right away, even if it's the shrewd move. But yeah, the Packers, what are they doing? Like, it's insane how they continuously make bad decisions about receivers and quarterbacks. It's like, all right, well, if you're going to keep Aaron Rodgers, keep Davante Adams. No, we're keeping Rodgers and getting rid of Adams. Okay, that makes no sense because now you have to rebuild the entire receiving core. You could have had a good receiver, but you took Jordan Love instead. There's just, like, someday someone's going to be able to write a book on the Packers roster moves at this point in time and be like, yeah, this didn't make any sense. Nothing about this did.
Yeah, they could have had, I mean, you mentioned some of the guys, Chase Claypool, T. Higgins. They could have had Michael Pittman. They could have had Brandon Ayuk. I think any of those guys would have won them at least one Super Bowl in the past 2 years because, last year Rodgers had no one to throw to. He would have had a good second receiver. And I think they get over the hump and beat the Niners. They crushed the Rams in the regular season. So I think they beat them. And then I think they beat the Bengals. They also beat the Bengals in the regular season. And the year before, it was a tight game with Tampa. They needed a touchdown. Rodgers couldn't get into the end zone. They had to settle for a field goal. If they get the touchdown, maybe they win that game. So, and then we saw what Tampa did to Kansas City in the Super Bowl. So I think they win at least one Super Bowl with a good receiver. They didn't do it, and now they don't have any receivers. So I just don't understand. So we had some other receiver trades. Most recently, the Titans got Robert Woods from the Rams for a 2023 6th-round pick. Doesn't seem like a lot. So what do you think about the trade?
Yeah, I love it for the Titans. I mean, they're giving up nothing to get Woods pretty much. And I know Woods is going to be a 29-year-old receiver, or maybe 30, one of the two, coming off a torn ACL. But he's still such a solid starting receiver. I'm assuming that the Titans aren't going to rely solely on him to carry that offense. Obviously, they have A.J. Brown. So him and Woods together, that looks great on paper. It's better than Julio Jones because Robert Woods doesn't have a long list of history with leg injuries. So I think he'll be in good shape there once he recovers. Maybe the Titans will draft another receiver to go with them. I know they drafted Des Fitzpatrick last year in the 4th round, but they cut him before the season before bringing him back. So maybe they view him as more of a 4th receiver. But either way, I like what they've done adding him. The Rams, I didn't love the value they're getting with Woods because it feels like none. And he was a pretty big part of their offense before he tore his ACL last year. But they signed Allen Robinson, so they couldn't pay him and Kupp and Robinson. And I'm anticipating that they're probably going to bring back Odell Beckham Jr. And they probably didn't want 2 receivers recovering from torn ACLs just in case one of them suffers a setback. So I think for now you roll with Kupp, you roll with Robinson, Van Jefferson, bring back Odell when he's healthy, plug him into the lineup along with Jefferson. You can ease him in like they did when they acquired Beckham the first time. So, yeah, I don't hate it from the Rams standpoint. They've added more depth. Robinson's younger and should do better with best quarterback he's ever played with than he did last year. So, yeah, I don't hate it for the Rams, but there's no value in it for them. So I like it better for the Titans.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I like this trade for the Titans, but it's not a slam dunk because Woods is coming off the torn ACL. There's a chance he may not be 100% in 2022, even though the injury occurred in the middle of the season, so it's at least better than Beckham's situation. But still, like receivers coming off torn ACLs don't have a good track record. Even look at Cortland Sutton last year. He suffered the injury early in the season. It just wasn't the same. So it's usually like a 2-year recovery window for receivers, but you never know. I mean, Woods could be the exception. There's always an exception. And giving up a 2023 sixth rounder, not even this year, in next April, I think there's no risk to this. So I like this for the Titans. I still think they need another receiver to go with Brown. You mentioned Des Fitzpatrick. Like he's okay. He might be okay, I should say. But I think they're probably going to draft a receiver at some point early in the 2022 draft. I have them drafting Chris Olave in the first round. So I think having a good trio for Ryan Tannehill makes a lot of sense, given how much he struggled in the playoffs. So yeah, the Titans. I think the Titans won this trade because the Rams aren't getting much, but still, like the Rams didn't need Robert Woods anymore because reportedly they're going to try to bring back Beckham, like you said. Also, Allen Robinson's there. We'll see what Robinson does because he was so terrible last year. But yeah, I mean, this is the best quarterback he's ever going to play with. So, I like that move for the Rams. And so with Robinson, Kupp, and Beckham, there's no room for Woods. So they had to trade him, and trading a receiver coming off a torn ACL, you're not going to get much. So it kind of made sense for the Rams, but yeah, the Titans, the upside's there for them for sure.
Definitely.
Yeah. All right. Another receiver is traded. It was Amari Cooper. He went from the Cowboys to the Browns for a 5th round pick and a swap of 6th round picks. Far cry from what the Cowboys gave up for him to get from the Raiders. So what do you think about this trade?
Yeah, I think the Browns didn't give up really anything to get Cooper, like, a little bit of draft capital, but nothing major. I was surprised because when I saw that they traded for him, I'm like, oh, they probably gave up a mid-round pick and we'll get Cooper for it. Like, I know that the Cowboys have been planning on cutting him if they couldn't trade him, so that took away some of their leverage. But I was still surprised that there weren't more suitors for him. I know he was making $20 million a year for the next 3 years, but I mean, that's kind of the going rate for good receivers right now. Chris Godwin got that. Mike Williams got that. Christian Kirk got close to that. So, I mean, Cooper's better than him, I would say. So, yeah, I think the Browns did well to get him. That'll give them a true, maybe 1A, 1B on the outside, depending on who they end up drafting. Well, before they had their 1st round pick, I thought they would take a receiver early. Now they'll have to take some mid-round guys. So they'll use Cooper as their number 1 guy this year. Gives Deshaun Watson a legitimate number 1 target, so that's good. And that they've really missed that last year because they couldn't run the ball because teams were stacking the box. They didn't have receiving weapons, and Mayfield couldn't throw because he was hurt. So that hurt the Browns pretty significantly. As for the Cowboys, I get it. They had to clear some cap space to keep some of their weapons. If they kept Cooper, they were going to lose Gallup and Schultz and Wilson and have to rebuild their receiving core. But I still don't love it. Dak Prescott needs weapons around him to play well. And they gave Michael Gallup a 5-year, I think it was $62.5 million contract. And I don't know, if we're talking about paying Michael Gallup that over 5 years versus paying Amari Cooper about the same amount over 3 years, I probably prefer Cooper right now. Maybe Gallup will change that, but he hasn't stayed healthy. So I don't love that. Granted, they're keeping him and Schultz turned into a good security blanket for the Cowboys last year, but I think their offense is going to be worse without Cooper. I'm pretty sure if I remember correctly, I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but Prescott without Cooper hasn't been nearly as good. So that could have an impact. No, CeeDee Lamb is still there, but our team's going to double CeeDee Lamb more often? I would say so. And then let Michael Gallup and Dalton Schultz do more of the work. Yeah. So I don't love it for the Cowboys. I get that they needed to do it to clear cap space, but this is just one of the instances where you see, hey, we paid Dak Prescott that big money contract. Now it's going to be on him to make these receivers around him better, and we're gonna have to see if he can do that.
Yeah, I don't hate this for the Cowboys. I don't love it, but there was a rumor that the speculation was that they would have to cut Amari Cooper because of his contract. So the fact that they got anything for him, I think, is a positive. But then again, at the time, it seemed like $20 million for a receiver was a lot, and then, like you said, all these bad contracts came out for the receivers, and now $20 million for Cooper doesn't seem nearly as obscene, given the contracts for Christian Kirk and some of the other wideouts. So yeah, I mean, the Cowboys were in a bad cap situation. If they were in a positive cap situation, I don't think they would have made this trade, because they wouldn't have had to give up Cooper. But it is interesting that you brought up that Prescott has a negative record without Cooper, because it seemed like last year Prescott and Cooper just weren't on the same page. Cooper had his best game with Cooper Rush in that one game that he started against Minnesota on Sunday night. So it seemed like Prescott had better chemistry with CeeDee Lamb and Dalton Schultz, even Cedric Wilson late in the year. I know Wilson's gone, but it seemed like if the Cowboys were to give up one of Lamb or Dalton Schultz or Cooper, it would have to be Cooper. So I think it kind of makes sense for that perspective. For the Browns, I wasn't as big of a fan of this trade back when I graded it, as I am now, because, like I said, $20 million doesn't seem that bad. With Cooper, though, you have to worry about him late in the season. He always seems to fade down the stretch. There always seem to be some injury concerns too. So I don't think this is a slam dunk trade for the Browns, but I do like it more than I did when I graded it.
Yeah, no, I can definitely understand that. If with Watson, the trade looks better for the Browns. I'm trying desperately in the background to find the Prescott stats without Cooper. I swear I wrote on it once at one point, but I don't know. I'm also might be confusing him with Tyron Smith, but we'll have to see if I can find that at some point. But yeah, I think he'll miss Cooper, but it is important to keep Lamb and, keep some of that offensive line intact too. Those are more important for him.
Yeah. All right. So let's move on to some edge rushers. The Chargers got Khalil Mack from the Bears for a 2nd-round pick this year and a 6th-round pick next year. So a huge trade. It seems like former Raiders are getting traded all the time. So what do you think about this trade?
Yeah, I like this trade for both sides, actually. I think it makes sense for the Chargers to make this kind of move. They needed a pass rusher to go across from Joey Bosa. Uchenna Nwosu was hitting free agency, and they really just didn't have that second real force up front. And Khalil Mack can absolutely be that. I mean, between him and Joey Bosa up front, teams are going to have a really hard time blocking those guys and keeping their quarterbacks clean. Like, you have to choose who you're going to double, and if you double Bosa, you're leaving Mack one-on-one and vice versa. That seems like a winning proposition for the Chargers. And they didn't have to go up a 1st-round pick to get Mack, which is huge. 2nd round and the 6th round is nothing to sneeze at. I thought the Bears did well to get that type of return. But from the Chargers standpoint, that's not too much. I mean, maybe they could have landed someone just as good in the 2nd round as Mack, but it's doubtful that they would certainly do that. So I like the move there. For the Bears standpoint, like, they're going into a mini rebuild. They had to reset the cap. Khalil Mack was set to have a massive cap hit. I think it was somewhere around $30 million. It was number 1 on the team. He missed half of last season, and Trevis Gibson played in his place and was pretty good. I mean, he wasn't Khalil Mack by any means, but Robert Quinn was great last year. You have Trevis Gibson. You need to open up cap space. You need to start to rebuild. Why not offload Mack for some assets and see what you can do with what you already have. So I don't dislike it from that perspective. I think that the Chargers did better than the Bears because they're getting the better player and they didn't surrender a 1st-round pick. But the Bears, they're not really going to be competitive this year unless Justin Fields takes a massive step forward. So I think that they're doing the right thing, cashing in on Mack while he still has value.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, Mack is 31, so he's going to decline at some point in the near future. So if you're the Bears, I feel like you have to get something for him now because, like you said, they're rebuilding. they have a lot of holes. They have nothing at receiver outside of Mooney. Their offensive line is in shambles, especially if Jason Peters leaves or retires. It just seems like and their defense is not nearly as good. Obviously, with Mack, it's going to be worse, but their defense has taken a step back since that 2018 season. So they really don't have much going for them right now. They have to rebuild with their new quarterback. And to do that, they need draft capital, and they got that for Max. So I think it's a fine trade for the Bears. But I love this for the Chargers. I mean, think of all the great quarterbacks in the AFC, even just their division. I mean, you have Patrick Mahomes and Russell Wilson, and then elsewhere now you have Matt Ryan, you have Lamar Jackson, you have Joe Burrow, you have Deshaun Watson, you have Josh Allen, you have we'll see if Tua takes a big step. You have Mac Jones, like. There's so many good quarterbacks in the AFC. Like, you need to pressure the quarterback as much as possible if you're in that conference. And now with Joey Bosa, Khalil Mack, they're gonna generate a lot of pressure. And can you imagine if they spend the 17th pick on another edge rusher, like which I have in my mock draft today? I have them taking Ajabo, falling because of his torn Achilles. Like he'll probably be able to play late in the year. Or if they get him or Jermaine Johnson or George Karlaftis, and they have like 3 guys who can get after the quarterback, I think that would be awesome. I think it would separate the Chargers from some of the other teams. Maybe not the Bills, because they have a great edge rush as well. But I think some of the other teams who have great quarterbacks don't have that same edge rush, like Kansas City, for example. I think that would put the Chargers maybe over the top. And, in the AFC West, you really need to be as great as possible because it's such a great division. So, yeah, I love this trade for the Chargers.
Yeah, I think what they've done to upgrade their defense between trading for Khalil Mack and signing J.C. Jackson. I think they've had a terrific offseason because both of those guys upgrade that defense immensely. And I think, to your point, you need to be able to get pressure in that division. I mean, you're talking about 6 divisional games that are going to be tough as nails. Even the weakest team they play, the Raiders, made the playoffs last year. So, I mean, you've got to get pressure on those quarterbacks. Khalil Mack's going to help you do that.
Yeah, I can't wait to watch those AFC West games. It's going to be a blast. Another AFC team that got an edge rusher. The Ravens got Yannick Ngakoue from the Vikings for a 3rd-round pick and a conditional 5th-round pick. So what do you think about this trade?
I think you meant the Colts.
Oh, the Colts. Sorry, yeah, the Colts. Yeah,
that was the other Yannick Ngakoue trade.
Yeah, right. I mean, he's been traded so much. Yeah, the Colts got Yannick Ngakoue from the Raiders for Rock Ya-Sin. So what do you think about this trade?
Yeah, I love this trade for the Colts. They've had a hole at that pass rush position basically since Robert Mathis and Dwight Freeney. Dwight Freeney, I think, went to San Diego, and then Mathis ended up retiring. Since then, they've not had a dominant pass rusher. They've kind of plugged the holes with, like, Justin Houston was there a little while. But they've never found that guy who can be the number 1 pass rusher. Yannick Ngakoue is that guy. I mean, he was great last year in Las Vegas across from Max Crosby. Gus Bradley knew exactly how to do him. Gus Bradley's now the defensive coordinator with the Colts, so he's going to be a scheme fit there. The Raiders had an awful pass rush before Ngakoue and Crosby kind of broke out, and then they were one of the better ones in the NFL. So I think Yannick Ngakoue is going to have a massive impact on the Colts, just their ability to get pressure. They still need a partner for him, but at the very least, he's going to put heat on one side of the quarterback. And like we said, in the AFC, that's going to be very, very important. And the Colts don't even play in that strong of a division in terms of quarterback talent. So it'll be even a bigger boon for them in those 6 games. As for the Raiders, I like Rock Ya-Sin as a player. I wouldn't trade Ngakoue straight up for him. I think that, Ngakoue is the better player. They're not too dissimilar in age. And I know that the Raiders needed some cornerback help, but I don't think that I think Ya-Sin's more of a number 2 guy, where Ngakoue is the number 1 pass rusher. So thought it was a clear win for the Colts. I don't hate the return for the Raiders, though. I think Ya-Sin will be a valuable part of that secondary. But yeah, the getting Ngakoue for the Colts is huge. Between that and Matt Ryan, they've really plugged 2 of their biggest holes this offseason. All that's left now is left tackle, some cornerback depth, and another starting receiver.
Yeah, I felt like Anchorman reading off stuff and not thinking about it there, because I copy pasted the wrong thing in my document I just read off. Yeah, no, I think you're right on. I think this is a close to an even trade. The Colts really needed a pass rush. They were dead last in pressure rate last year, And given all the good quarterbacks in the AFC, like I said, you really need to get after the quarterback, and Ngakoue is going to be able to help them do that. We'll see if Kwity Paye makes the jump. They still have DeForest Buckner. So their pass rush theoretically should be a lot better in 2022. Now, and Ngakoue is not a perfect player. Like, even though he gets a lot of pressure on the quarterback, he tends to struggle against the run. But the Colts are a pretty solid team against the run. So maybe he won't be as big of a liability as he was with the Raiders, because I know that's the one thing the Raiders didn't like about him, is like he was such a liability against the run. So like that would explain why they traded him. They got Rock Ya-Sin back. I think I agree with you. I think Ngakoue is a better player than Ya-Sin, but Ya-Sin is a couple years younger, so I think maybe that makes sense. The Colts, or the Raiders, had cornerback issues, so they're kind of filling that with Ya-Sin. I worry about the Colts cornerback situation, but maybe they'll draft some guys to help in that regard. So I think this is an even trade. If I were to reference Kenny, if I had a gun pointed at me and need to bet $1 on which team would win this trade, I'd probably say the Colts, but it's pretty close though.
Yeah, I like Rock Ya-Sin enough that I understand why I have it graded equally there. But yeah, I think I just prefer Ngakoue just because of the need he fills with the Colts. Again, not that Ya-Sin doesn't feel a need for the Raiders. I just think, Ngakoue fills that gaping hole that the Colts have had for so long. And, the Raiders have had a cornerback hole for so long, but I don't think they're going to be like, we got Rock Ya-Sin. We're absolutely set at cornerback now.
That's true, especially when they're covering all those receivers that the elite quarterbacks are throwing to. It's going to be. I think it's going to be pretty rough for the Raiders. Maybe at least like when they're playing AFC teams. If they're playing, they're probably going to go like 4-0/5-0 against the NFC this year. But against the AFC, it's going to be pretty rough. All right. Other trade going to the offensive line. The Buccaneers got Shaq Mason from the Patriots for a 5th round pick. This kind of came out of nowhere, so I was a bit surprised by it. So what do you think about this trade?
Yeah, the Buccaneers Patriots trades tend to come out of nowhere. They're always just like, oh, okay, Gronk's going to the Bucs. All right, didn't know that was possible. But yeah, the Buccaneers, per usual, have won this trade. Shaq Mason has been one of the best guards in the NFL. You don't hear about him much because he's in Foxborough, but he's a great blocker. He really solidified that right guard spot for the team. The Patriots, I don't like what they've done this offseason with their offensive line. They let Ted Karras walk, and they also traded Shaq Mason, and they hadn't signed Trent Brown for a while. They brought him back, so that salvaged it a bit. But they're really going to miss Mason up front, and I know they're good at finding day 3 picks at guard. Mason was a day 3 pick at guard, so was Mike Onwenu. But I think that if you look at it from the Bucs perspective, they lost Alex Kappa and Ali Marpet. They had to replace at least one of them externally. They have Aaron Stinney, who they seem to like, and may let him start at left guard. But getting Mason to replace Kappa, Mason is arguably as good, if not better, than Kappa, and he's paid less than Kappa. Granted, you have to give up a draft pick to get him as opposed to re-signing Kappa, but it's worth it because you're paying, I think, $7 million for Mason. You're giving up just a 5th round pick, which maybe you find a good guard there, maybe you don't. So I think it's a big win for the Buccaneers. I hate when teams get rid of talented offensive linemen. Belichick tends to make trades a year too early as opposed to too late, which is the smart way to do business long term, but in the short term it can hurt. And I want to see what happens at the right guard position this upcoming year. It could get painful if they don't find a quality replacement.
Yeah, I love this trade for Tampa. I agree with you completely. They lost his 2 guards. They had to replace one, and maybe if they don't think Stinney's ready to play or start right away, like maybe they draft a guard in the 1st round. So that's what I have happening in my mock draft. But either way, I mean, Shaq Mason gives them an upgrade over what they had. He's one of the best guards in the NFL. I know there's a track record of Patriot players leaving the team and doing worse because they don't get as good of coaching as they do with Belichick and the rest of the staff. But Shaq Mason's just so talented. I think that's going to buck the trend a little bit, and I think he's going to play great with Tom Brady. Obviously, they have the chemistry together from their time in New England. So I love this trade for Tampa. For New England, not as high. Only getting a 5th round pick for one of the best guards in the NFL just doesn't seem like enough. I know they wanted to clear some salary cap space, but I think I'd rather have Mason protecting my young quarterback and helping him develop. And if Mac Jones's protection is worse in his second year, then he could take a step back. Now, Belichick has had a long track record of finding offensive linemen out of nowhere. It just seems like he always finds these guys who do well, and then he develops them into good blockers. So maybe he does that, and I don't think this is a total loss. I don't think it's a guarantee that Mac Jones is going to have bad protection because they lost Karras and Mason. So I think the Patriots could come up with something. Belichick is the master, and he has a plan. So. But overall, I think you have to say that Tampa won this trade.
Yeah, there's one big loss up front that no one else, or at least nationally, doesn't know as much about. Dante Scarnecchia, their offensive line coach, is retired again. Coach Scar is the best in the business at developing linemen. And in his previous retirement, the Patriots line regressed significantly without him. So I worry a little bit about that having an impact on any replacement they find. But like you said, Belichick and the Patriots have been good at finding offensive linemen out of nowhere. I'm sure they'll find a quality player to potentially replace Mason, but they definitely are the losers of this move. It was just an A+ move for Tampa Bay, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, he's such a great offensive line coach. But I wonder, given that how much the Patriots struggled after his first retirement, maybe Belichick has a plan, like a backup plan this time. But that's what I wonder. It could be wrong. And maybe New England's offensive line really does take a step back this year. It could happen for sure. But I trust Belichick more than I wouldn't, So I think the Patriots will be fine, but we'll see. So yeah, I mean, those are the major trades that happen. Obviously, there was some big free agency news. We touched on Christian Kirk a little bit. We could maybe delve more into that in a later episode, but yeah, we hit on all the big names, I think, and so it was an awesome couple of weeks of all the trades. We're still gonna have some trades with Mayfield and maybe Garoppolo, but yeah, it was a terrific offseason. I had a lot of fun grading it and then discussing it with you on the show.
Yeah, it was a great offseason. Like I said a few weeks ago, we were like, I don't know if these quarterbacks are going to go anywhere. It might not be as exciting as we think. And there's already 8 teams with new starting players that are projected to be starting quarterbacks that are new to the team. So it makes things interesting, that's for sure.
Yeah. As soon as Rodgers resigned, I'm like, okay, we're not going to have any movement. And then and it's kind of like the dam broke open when Wilson was traded, and once that happened, you're like, okay, they're gonna be some serious musical chairs happening, and that's exactly what happened. So yeah, we'll be back next week to talk about more NFL offseason stuff, I'm sure. So do you have anything to plug?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at Jacob Kamiker. I try to post my picks and NFL thoughts there periodically. Some of my articles from sportingnews.com will also go up there. You can check out sportingnews.com for all your latest sports news, as the title would suggest. We got plenty of NFL stuff going on over there. I've got contract breakdown for Matt Ryan, trade grades for that move, as well as many of the others. Also, some college basketball stuff coming out for March Madness. I have my best bets for the Sweet 16, so feel free to either follow those or fade those. I am the ultimate coin flip in college basketball. Never trust the long-term bets I do. I had Tennessee winning the tournament, so that didn't go well. But yeah, anyway, check all that stuff out at Sporting News. Follow me on Twitter. And if you have any sports questions, shoot them my way. If I see them, I will try to answer them.
Yeah, we both picked overrated SEC teams to win because I had Kentucky winning the whole thing. So yeah, it's pretty bad. So I was debating between Houston and Kentucky, and obviously it chose the wrong team to win it all. So yeah, that was a bummer, but yeah, please hit like, subscribe, comment below, share this video, visit the link in the description for the merch store. All that would help us out a ton. So please just do anything, any of those. Also, WalsonFootball.com, we have grades for every signing, every trade. We have updated rankings, free agency rankings. There's still some good players available, so you can check out who's there. Updated my 2022 NFL mock draft today, which is the update after free agency is always the toughest one because so much has happened. So there are a ton of changes that occurred with the mock draft, plus the compensatory picks that were added. So yeah, that update took me a while, so definitely check that out. Charlie has great content as usual for the draft. But yeah, otherwise, I'll talk to you next week.
All right, sounds good. Talk to you then.